Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're listening. Happy Tuesday. This is Allen Helton, along with my co-host Andres Moreno, here to talk to you about you. In episode 2 of the Believe in Serverless podcast, we're going to cover everything that happened last week from July 22nd to the 28th. Let's jump in. As a reminder, this podcast is to catch you up on what you might have missed. We'll cover the best conversations from Discord, answer any pressing questions that went unanswered, and discuss the live sessions and what we found interesting about them. But before we start rolling, let's first thank our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Momento, an enterprise-ready serverless infrastructure platform with caching, event messaging, and storage services. Momento is a pay-as-you-go platform with instantly available cloud resources that elastically scale to meet even the most demanding workloads. Get started today for free by going to console.gomomento.com. Thank you, Momento team, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast and for your ongoing support of the Believe in Serverless community. Now that we have all the fun stuff out of the way, Andres, good morning. We are recording in the morning. How are you?
Yes, I am good. Good morning, Alan. Glad to see you on camera, recording. This is great.
It is. And I mean, not that anybody else cares, we get to see each other this week.
Yes.
You're flying over to Dallas this week. So thank goodness you're leaving the desert into urban desert.
Yeah, to the nice
I think the day that you get here, it's going to be 101 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, okay.
So welcome. And please don't actually bring the desert with you. I'm not looking forward to that at all.
I'll try to not.
So what I like to do in this podcast is to kind of kick us all off. I want to welcome the new members. We had 11 new members this week.
It's a good
bringing our total up to, how many is that? We now have 830 members in our Discord community. So that's a good number, especially for starting in January. Yeah. Yes. So again, this is going to be kind of like last week where it's super awkward where I'm just reading screen names because I don't know what your actual name is, but we're going to say hi anyway. So welcome the Genie AI guy, Chris RZ, Harry, Pi, Wapinion, Chiedo, Nyanko Sensei, Ryan Chance, Eric Bellavance, Amanda G, and Iron. We're super happy to have you here in the community.
Welcome.
And I am looking forward to learning from you. 830 members. We're getting somewhere.
And the fact that it keeps growing, we haven't had a dip yet. So still pretty happy with how it's all flowing.
Yes, and I was actually just having a conversation just this past week about how the community is like, I don't want to say it's a perfect size because we want it to keep growing, but it's like a perfect size right now where there's always conversations going on, but not so many that it's impossible to keep up. Like you look away and you look back and the chat window that you had is completely new with messages. It's still meaningful. It still has a lot of information from these real world practitioners that you can actually keep up with.
Yeah, it's super manageable. And again, day after day, I keep learning from all the great practitioners out there.
It's so good. And let's talk about some of those things. Now, there were a lot of conversations that were had in Discord last week, but we chose 3 of them to talk about today a little bit in detail to kind of talk about what they talked about inside the conversations themselves, and then also give our opinions on them as well. So the first one, the quintessential serverless conversation, they were having conversations about cold starts. Now, specifically, now that we have Ashley Peacock in there, big Cloudflare advocate, also turning into a really nice voice in the community as well. He loves Cloudflare. And so he's bringing all this information about Cloudflare in and educating the AWS folks, really everybody, about Cloudflare. So we were having a conversation about Cloudflare cold starts, or really the lack thereof of cold starts. And, he gave us a nice little summary of why there's not a cold start. And his little excerpt was, what do you say? Like too long didn't read or sneak preview. They do warm up or environment warm ups in the TLS handshake, which is an incredibly cool, innovative idea from Cloudflare. What do you think about it? What do you think about it? That's like the amount that these people know about infrastructure, networking.
Yeah, it's above. I mean, I'm a basically application engineer, right? I've been building applications. So getting that deep into the weeds and understanding how you can avoid a cold start and how you're creating those types of handshakes to make it faster or insignificant, it's awesome. Not that I can think that I will have the idea to make it better at some future, but just the fact that we can leverage it as engineers is awesome.
Absolutely. Now, I don't share this with a lot of people because I don't use it, but my specialty in my college degree is in networking. I have my degree says Bachelor's of Science, Software Engineering, specialty in networking. And I'm super happy every day that I don't have to actually use that. Uh, but it actually comes in handy when we're talking about things like this Cloudflare doing things during that TLS handshake because there are, different steps inside of establishing that connection. Because all of the requests going into Cloudflare require an HTTPS connection, there's several things that it has to do. There's different layers inside of that protocol that are doing things. And really, I don't want to go too deep into it because it has been, I don't know, 12 years since I graduated college and 12 years since I've used the networking stuff. But in that initial act, that initial basically hello world piece of a TLS handshake, what Cloudflare is doing is it's kickstarting the engines on these containers that are running your workers. And by the time the rest of that negotiation is done inside of this encrypted I trust you handshake, the environment's spun up and it's ready to go. So that, mitigates a lot of that time with cold starts. And the cold starts in general in Cloudflare are a little bit faster anyway because it's a specialized runtime. It's not just running Node 20 or whatever programming language. It's specialized Cloudflare runtime.
That's pretty nice. It's like they have a secret handshake or something. We should make one next week, Alan. But what's the time that the cold start, is it 0 because it's already all pre-warmed and going once it
I want to
goes
say
back?
the article that I read about it, I think it said like worst case scenario, you're at 5 milliseconds to load a worker.
Okay, nothing.
You can
Okay,
take that.
yeah, anytime. Cool.
So
Good.
definitely worthwhile reading. Ashley shared a blog post from Cloudflare that talks about that warm up process, and we'll put it in the show notes because it's incredibly fascinating. Now, just one more note before we move on from cold starts. I've written blog posts about this for years. I think we talk about cold starts too much anyway. As an application developer, it's not as important. Now, there's exceptions to every rule. Please don't jump on me on social media and say, yes, they're super important. In a lot of scenarios, they're not as important as the amount of focus and attention that it gets.
Yep.
Especially
Yeah.
with runtimes coming up, like in AWS, like LLRT, that are drastically reducing that cold start time anyway.
It's very critical workflows, right? That you need to take care. Like you worked, I still work in the public sector, right? And like CAD systems, police receiving calls, right? Those need to act and those reports need to act fast. So there's less wiggle room for those cold starts, but the regular day to day, 500 milliseconds, it's not like you're losing clients based on that response time, right? So most of us don't see that issue on our day to day lives.
Agreed. And again, exceptions to every rule.
Yeah.
Please don't block Andres and I on social media.
Don't cancel us because of cold start. And I do want to call out, Ashley is writing a book around Cloudflare, right? And they've mentioned it several times in the Discord.
A second book. He already has.
Second, okay. I need to get the first
Yes.
one. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Congratulations on that, Ashley.
Yeah.
Extremely cool scenario. We have a lot of book authors inside of the Discord community, and it's super cool to see that. It's like I never thought, Andres, when you and I started working together, it was almost 10 years ago at this point. Never in my life did I think that we would be friends with or just be able to reach out at any point in time to a book author and ask a question, like a very specific, pointed question. How do you do this? Or what do you mean by this sentence in your book that I'm actively reading? And we have tons of them available. It's so cool.
And they're there in the Believe in Serverless Discord, right? And I keep telling like my wife and my family, it's like I can reach out to the author of the book that wrote the expert around the things I'm working on, right? And that's not common. So please kind of a shout out to the Discord and Believe in Serverless, right? You have access to all these people that are the experts, the authors of these books, to just answer questions or just talk.
Absolutely. It's super cool. And on that note, we have Sheen Bristles, who just wrote the Serverless Architectures on AWS book that's going to be giving a talk for Believe in Serverless sometime in August. Still working out that date, but he did say that he wants to do that and come in and talk about probably a little bit about the book writing process, but also about what he wrote in general.
A lot of good stuff.
Okay. Topic number 2 inside of Discord from last week was disaster recovery inside of Serverless. Now, this was one of the things when you and I were working together that I was put into a room by myself and told to figure out. That was not my favorite month. I'll be honest with you. It was a lot.
And it's interesting, right? Because it's said disaster recovery in serverless, and that because it takes a whole different approach for traditional infrastructures, servers or EC2 instances. So it's very interesting. The different ways you can do disaster recovery in serverless. And I remember you coming out with the solution. It was like, well, it wasn't as complicated, right? Because it's serverless. That we could do and we can talk about several others, right? But we can just deploy all our infrastructure. We operate on the Gov Cloud, right? So we can have it deployed on West and East, right? And something fails, just change the DNS record, in kind of an active situation. But you get into the data stuff where DynamoDB is great with global tables, and those replications, but just digging into that in a serverless infrastructure is very interesting, and how you can keep it very, very simple, as far as disaster recovery from major outages from a service in one region. If you have the whole service out, then that's a whole different story, which I haven't seen happen.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was in 2022, US East 1 had an issue with, it might have been SQS buffering for like 2 hours, something like that. And it took everything down. Like nothing worked inside of my house. And I even remember seeing like fallout from that for the weeks to come on side of Twitter, that things like people's robot vacuums weren't triggering on their schedules because they were set inside of US East 1 and triggered to start remotely, and that wasn't working. So the joke that you and I had when I was coming up with the disaster recovery plan for our enterprise was, if a region goes down with one of these major services that we rely on, we have bigger problems to worry about. We should probably be filling our bathtubs with water and going into a room that has no windows.
Yeah. Yeah, whole region, and we've seen whole region outages, but at that point, what has it been? I think like network issues in AWS where it's an hour or two. It takes you longer for you to migrate and change and repoint to another region, at least in my situation, than it would take the experts at AWS to fix my regional problems.
Yeah. Now there's 2 things that people I guess objectify or have KPIs around when we're talking about disaster recovery. And this is outside the scope of serverless. It's just in general disaster recovery, that you have RPO and RTO, which is super easy to remember because the acronyms are so similar, right?
Yeah.
So RPO, recovery point objective, is the moment in time where your data stops, basically. So if earthquake happens, it takes out your data center at 11:15 a.m. Is 11:15 a.m. the last point where you have your data?
Yeah.
And then, conversely, the RTO, recovery time objective, is how quickly can you get back online and actually, start pumping on, probably not all cylinders, but some at least.
And you see it with GitHub and every major company, right? It's like, okay, we're recovering, right? We're getting the flow back, right? So you're recovering from the major outage. And RTO, not to be confused with return to office. Nowadays, it can be very confusing.
Yes. So typically your RTO is going to be faster than your RPO because you want your system to be working before your data loss. So the conversation that we were having inside of Discord was really about those things, about both RTO and RPO, where when you're deploying serverless resources, which realistically most modern production apps aren't going to just be deploying that. We have provision services, we have instances that are backing something in the scene. But serverless resources, totally fine to just say, okay, yeah, go ahead and deploy this into my failover region or a multi-region deploy, and use something like Route 53 if you're inside of AWS, or Cloudflare, to sit in front and act basically as your DNS crossing guard. Let's go over this way, let's go over that way. And there's different strategies as well that you can have anyway, besides just always point to this region, always point to that region. You can have things like latency-based routing, where if you're coming from the West Coast, let's route you to the West Coast region anyway. So, the easiest thing to do with serverless is go ahead and deploy things into multiple regions if you're adamant on having a disaster recovery strategy. That was one of the things that Ashley Peacock was talking about. And what he also was talking about for, pragmatically, because we have provisioned instances like EC2 and other containers that are doing work for us, identify those critical must-have paths and data points and back those up. Not everything needs to be available inside of a disaster recovery scenario. And you actually see this, whether or not you pick up on it, I don't know, but you actually see this on Amazon a lot, Amazon.com. When you're shopping, sometimes a banner that is usually there that routes you to something else, something related, or the GenAI that's now telling you about the items, it's just not there, like literally not there. And that could be because it's having a moment and it just gets turned off.
And it's not critical for their day-to-day operations, right? So you can do that, and with good, and probably difficult in some situations, but identifying those critical points, because depending on who you talk to, it's like, well, everything's important, right? So really getting to the point and what is truly critical for your workflows is a good thing to identify. And those are the things, I'm big on automation, right? Those are the things you automate the most, right? Make sure those never go down. And once you fail over, you can run those same automation tests or whatever you have, verify on that other infrastructure, and you make sure it's working. Boom, let's go. Let's move it.
Yep. So what we just talked about is kind of camp one for serverless disaster recovery. Deploy serverless resources to your primary region or regions and your failover region. And then also deploy your provision resources like EC2 and data backups to just the critical information to your disaster recovery as well. Yep. So that's camp one. And then we had another camp that was, in my opinion, a very radical approach, where it was, if there is a disaster, we just redeploy everything somewhere else, like from scratch. There's no active. It's like active ready when talking about disaster recovery. So they have everything in infrastructure as code, which we all should at this point. It's the middle of 2024. I hope we're all doing that right now.
Yes.
But everything's ready. It's locked and ready to go. All the data, well, again, it's more critical and probably like just subcritical data is backed up. And then if there is a disaster, deploy it all. Like basically kill the production stack and redeploy everything into your failover region. That's an interesting camp, and I guess it works. I mean, it works. Your RPO is going to be, your RTO is going to be a little bit higher in a situation like that, because you have to wait for that deploy time, especially if we're doing things like CloudFront or I try not to do AWS specific anymore, but like a CDN that take a while to distribute globally to all the edge locations. It takes a while. It's going to slow down your RTO. And then it comes with the burden of you really need to be running these disaster playbooks at least quarterly, where let's fail over right now. Let's deploy. Let's make sure that all of the code changes that have happened this quarter aren't preventing us from deploying. Make sure we didn't have a cyclical dependency that now prevents us. We ran into that.
Yeah. Because you're just doing updates, right? And updates are very different than a clean install. And once you have a clean install, you might identify those cyclical dependencies. The other point there is the data, right? So you can't just have the region backup, right? So you have to back it up and put it somewhere else to then recover from that, which is a lot if you have instances, right? So I'm trying to be not AWS specific either, but it's hard. So EC2 instances and something that takes longer, right? So if you're deploying a VPC and all that stuff, it takes like 30 minutes, right? So you're going to have all that and then ingest all the data back into a database, whether you're using Dynamo, or Aurora, or whatever. That takes time, right? So that's when you and I talked. It's like, well, how long will it take us to get back up versus the 1 or 2 hours that they usually take to fix these outages in the region we're already at? But it still depends on the industry you're on and your requirements and your the compliance needs for your industry. So definitely all good options.
Tolerance. Yes, you're right. Another way to say that is your tolerance for failure. If that tolerance of failure is, tiny, you're probably not best suited for serverless or a disaster recovery scenario that we just discussed. It's something else. You got to run active and be ready to hot swap at any point in time. You might not even hot swap, honestly. It might be something that's just latency-based routing, and you have just redundant regions that always are up to date.
Yep.
Let's talk about the last topic of conversation, and it's one that intimidates me, just to be honest, and that's Lambda versioning and aliases, really both of those things. And to be non-AWS, we could just say function versioning and aliasing. Now, I'm not super versed in things that aren't AWS. Trying to get better, but I'm still not. So I don't know if all the providers have versions and aliases for their serverless functions. We do know that AWS does, and they're hard. People say they're complex. Now, we've tried before. At least I tried in a research spike one time. What's your opinion on versioning of your functions?
It's one thing I focus a lot is on the developer experience, right? And, we do the same thing. So you're troubleshooting something, you go directly into the Lambda function and edit it there. Once you have versionings, that's one piece where it's not as simple because you have to play around with, okay, let me hook it up to the latest, or I remember having issues with that. It's been a while since I played with versioning. I've never actually had it for a production application, right? We played around for canary deployments. That's one thing you lose if you don't do Lambda versioning. Haven't had the need is basically at this point to use Lambda versionings and keep two hot Lambda versions with my old code and my new code. So I try to keep it that way.
I understand that. And that, again, comes back to your tolerance for failure. Based on how little or how much your tolerance for failure is, you might need to run canary deployments. I might need to route 5% of my traffic over to the new code change that's coming in, because if it fails for whatever reason, if we introduced a bug, that could be catastrophic to my business.
Yep.
And so being able to progressively increase the traffic to the new code change would be actually really important. And that's where you might want to consider bringing that complexity in. Now,
but one thing that, it's talking about that, right? And feature flags are a big thing, which you can treat them that way as well, right? And you stay away from Lambda versioning, but you're treating it with the feature flag, whether you're using app config, launch darkly, or whatever. You can start shifting traffic, right, via the feature flag. So you still have the code in the code base, which is you have the code in Lambda service, but you're just shifting it within the same version of the Lambda. So
now it's not always about adding new features. You could be doing a bug fix and take something down. That's something that I haven't seen so much, at least for the way that you and I structured Lambda functions when we were working on serverless stuff together. Everything was completely isolated. But when you start sharing code and having kind of more of an hexagonal architecture where you are importing data transformations, importing the database layer more or less, you could make a change for a bug deep down that's getting used by 5 or 6 different things, make it change and inadvertently break something else. So the interesting thing that I saw in this conversation inside of Discord when we're talking about versioning and aliasing is that Marcin from Ryanair really was an advocate for it. He's like, how else would you trace things? How else are you gonna run analytics? How else are you gonna do all these things that really make sense at the scale that Ryanair is running? They think they're doing like billions of events every month. But everybody else in that conversation pretty much said the same thing, which was, I tried it. It was too complex. Fell back. So I'm wondering if it becomes, it sounds like it's a maturity thing and a volume of scale thing to me.
Yeah. And it's maybe you find ways to observe differently, right? And not with Lambda version. So it's just making sure you're not losing something big. And I would be interesting to see, okay, how are you using Lambda versioning to better to improve your observability of your application, right? Versus what are other people doing and maybe achieving the same thing, but because I've seen people, somebody mentioned, right? They tag the commit into the Lambda name or something like that to be able to. So still, you have the specific commit for the Lambda, so you're deploying multiple Lambdas instead of versions, and maybe they're tracking it differently, or it's just so many ways to solve this, to do the same thing, and interesting to see how other people are doing it.
Agreed. Now, before we move on to the next thing, I'm going to take this rare opportunity to call you out. And you said you're deploying multiple Lambdas, but I'm going to call you out Lambda functions. So I'm only saying this because I never get that opportunity, and I'm really happy that I finally do get to say that.
I'm pretty good at not saying Lambdas. Dang it. I'm pretty good at not saying Lambdas, and it did.
Happy week. Week C. Okay. So the next part of the podcast is where we answer unanswered questions that were posed inside of Discord. Now, the community in general is really good about answering anything that's posed. But there was one that was asked over the weekend that didn't get any answers. It was just crickets. And it was asked by Omid, and he asked in the observability channel, does anyone have any experience using Baselime at enterprise? Is it reliable, scalable, well-performing? I don't actually have the real answer to this. So I feel like I'm just going in this section under false pretenses, but we could talk about Baselime a little bit because it's a fantastic observability platform. I love it. I've been using it on a dev scale really since its inception a couple of years ago, and I think you have been as well.
Yeah, I've played around with it. I've used it for personal projects and stuff. For everybody, Baselime, big observability platform, just got acquired by Cloudflare. And they're working to integrate better with all the Cloudflare to provide better observability, while Baselime is still staying as its own standalone product, which you can consume for your application. But yeah, my experience, again, I started using it like 2 years ago, and it's very dev focused in the sense that it's so easy to use, right? So easy to get running. I remember just starting to get into the observability space and trying to, okay, what do I need? I need to provision all this stuff within my account. And then I'll start panicking when I see CloudFormation stacks ramping up on my Baselime is a lot. There's a way to do it hands off where you don't have to do those things and provide that connectivity for you, but still all the options they provide, and they're simple for everyone, engineers to consume and get data out of the bat. And just minutes after it's installed and set, it's you're getting reports of errors. It's like, I've never seen this. It's like, okay, let me look into this.
Yes, I remember the day that they added that email on error feature. I started getting a lot of them because apparently a lot of the things I was deploying into my AWS account were erroring, and it was amazing. It was like I didn't have to do anything. It just got better, and I started getting informed on the things that were happening unexpectedly inside of my account. And I was able to just immediately get these insights into the things that I was building that were breaking. It was a lot of things, but not anymore. It's just super not.
Yeah.
Now, we should probably talk a little bit about that Cloudflare acquisition, because we can use that more or less as the basis or a well-educated guess to Omid's question, where he's asking, is it reliable? Is it scalable? Is it well performing? If Cloudflare bought it, you could pretty much rest assured that it's gonna be, if it's not already.
Yeah.
Relying on that global network that we just talked about that has no cold starts and just replicates around the world immediately with its magic, it's gonna be top notch.
Yeah, it's got to be right at scale. And like you said, even if it doesn't right now, they see the potential. It has the potential to grow into the observability layer for Cloudflare, right? To manage all your observability things with this tech that they created at Baselime.
Yeah. And I want to read a paragraph from the acquisition article between Cloudflare and Baseline, because it made me super excited when I was reading it this weekend. It was, we want to push the boundaries of what modern observability looks like. For instance, directly connecting to your code base and correlating insights from your logs and traces to functions and classes in your code base. We want to enable more AI capabilities beyond our debugging assistant. We want to deeply integrate with your repositories such that you can go from an error in your logs and traces to a pull request in your code base within minutes.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yes. Now, the press releases, of course, they're designed to get you excited and hyped up. But if that's something that they can actually do, and I think they can, yeah,
we're technologically we're there, right? And this is the year, or even since last year, where you can do those types of things, right? Hey, you got this error, and it identifies you're running on AWS Lambda. This is I can find the correlation to the code where it lives, scan the code with some GenAI. It's like, here's your issue, and even provide a code fix. It's like, hey, do this or fix it for you with a pull request, like they mentioned. It's like crazy, but it's achievable. I don't see it like a pipe dream or something. It seems something we can have, and maybe it's going to scare some people, but you got to have the right protections. Got to learn how to use the tooling.
Yeah, disruption scares a lot of people.
But this will reduce a lot of development, maintenance, and all that if we get to that point.
Yes. Now, last thing I'll say on this, last year in April, I was in London and I went to what are they called? A summit, an observability summit led by Baselime, by Boris Tane, who was the CEO at the time. I think he's now considered a principal engineer at Cloudflare. He got a bunch of people together in the serverless space across AWS, Azure, everybody. We all got into a room. We were all talking about the developer experience of observability and what we were looking for, what we had, and what we, just what was wrong with it. And so we were there for probably 2 hours, just diving deep into observability, developer experience, all these things. And it's really cool on the other end of that to see what the vision is from Cloudflare, because it's like directly what we were talking about inside of that symposium or summit. Really cool. I have a lot of trust in that group of people.
Yeah, and I've met a couple of them, and yeah, they give you trust. They're good people, just trying to solve problems, make our lives easier, and make our applications fail less.
Yes, or fail faster. Maybe not less, but faster.
Yeah, you've seen my code.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so let's talk about the live streams that we had last week. We had 3 sessions go on last week, and actually 3 very different types of sessions. We had a fireside chat, which is more or less like what you and I are doing right now. It was like a video podcast that was live.
Love the picture. Love the picture for
Juan
that
Garcia. We had a presentation from Chris Price about gRPC, using it in production, what he's learned. And then we had a live stream as well from Danielle Heberline using DigitalOcean functions for the first time. All of 3 very different formats and really good information that came out of them. So one of the things that we do in this podcast is take some of the clips from those live streams, watch them, and then talk about them. So we're just going to jump right into that. And let's have a look at what Juan Garcia and I were talking about last week. The whole premise of this AI tech sprint for the VA was reducing provider burnout. How do you feel that your application is reducing that burnout?
Doctors, they spend hours processing all this documentation. And something that takes you hours of doing manual work, now you have it in, from 1 to 5 minutes, you have all of that ready for you. I've seen up to 80-90% reduction in time. Things that took you hours of checking and doing manually. But you have everything done right for you in, say, in a minute.
So this was a really cool thing. We were going over it wasn't a hackathon, it was a tech sprint, which lasts a lot longer than a hackathon. We were going over his project that actually won. Like, he was flown into DC to go present it and everything, and got a lot of accolades for it. And he was using GenAI really at its core to be able to make things easier for providers or doctors, as I've learned from all my time in the hospital recently. So Andres, what do you think about that? Obviously in that clip, we weren't talking about technical detail. We were talking about his project more at a higher level.
It's, again, and I already mentioned a little bit of this, it's using tooling to enhance your lives, whether that's with developer experience, in this case, provider or doctor's experience. So it's pretty awesome the way you can use tech right now. And this, I'm assuming it doesn't go into the details of analyzing documents and providing summaries and stuff like that to make it easier and enhance people's, or make better use of people's times to be able to tend to, like you said, you've been to doctors a lot lately, and for them to not be able to tend to you versus be stuck with paperwork reading stuff is better for everyone. You don't have to wait 4 hours in a doctor's waiting room for them to tend to you because they don't have to summarize something afterwards, or it's all taken care of immediately. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And what I like about it is it seems so counterintuitive that things like this are leaning heavily into the bleeding edge of tech right now. But what that ends up doing is it brings the people element of things back to the forefront. Providers can now focus on the people side of it, knowing that they don't have X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to do when they're done. It's just there. Just super cool.
Yeah, it's a shifting and going back to the people, right? And this specific scenario, and relieving time to be able to do more important stuff, right? So
yeah,
go back. Don't be afraid of the tooling. Again, add the necessary protection measures, but let's try and leverage them and make them better. To, again, a lot of developer experience stuff are coming up for us to use, and then we're using AI, GenAI, to better improve our customers' lives. It's so many, and you've got a great mind where you have so many ideas in your brain. If you go to any industry, you go, oh, they could do this. It's like, wow.
Yeah. Yes. As long as it's a non-critical path, there's a lot of ways to misuse GenAI, but for like what Juan was doing, he was using it for summary. It's okay if summary is a little bit wrong because you have the transcript, you have the things that actually happened. And one of the cool things that Juan was talking about in this project is it actually has references inside of the transcript to what it's summarizing. So you can jump straight to it and see what actually happened based on the sentence in the summary.
Kind of like the book where you get a little one, and then you can go to, okay, what does the one mean? Then do, and just a little bit more context in the reference, which is that's pretty cool because you can corroborate, right, the correctness of it, and then you can use another process to validate. Hey, is this correct? Right. So that's just,
absolutely,
just keep going.
And that's totally the phase that we're in with GenAI right now. We should be validating the things that it's coming up with. We shouldn't just be taking what it's saying as golden truth. Okay, let's talk about live stream number 2, using gRPC in production. Now, this comes from Chris Price, who is the engineering manager at Momento, who is responsible for the ecosystem side. So it's all of the public facing or the consumer stuff. So this is the guy that's responsible for like the 12 SDKs that Momento has put out over the past couple of years. Let's see what Chris has to say about gRPC.
being able to only have to have one connection open from each one of those mobile devices to the server is huge. Like if they needed to send a bunch of concurrent requests to us and we had to have 10 or 100 connections open from each one of those mobile devices to our servers, the error would be
crazy.
Yeah. Like most, typically, I feel like you start to run into problems with servers when you get over the order of maybe like 20,000 connections, or maybe if you really tweak things, you can get up to like 100,000 connections on a server. But when you start going beyond that, it gets really hard.
This is pretty close to home for me and for you as well. I've given presentations at multiple conferences about building your own WebSocket server, WebSocket service, really is what it was. And it was about work that you and I did when we were working together, where we built a notification service that basically managed AWS WebSockets. It was like 700 lines of infrastructure as code, like 8 Lambda functions, a database, all these different things. All it was doing was facilitating communications between clients and servers. And the way that it was engineered, it was fine at the scale that we were operating at, but we didn't operate at that 100,000 connection count that Chris was just talking about. Now, that's one of the drawbacks about using things like WebSockets is it has that serial connection. Every single client to a server is a connection. And what Chris is talking about is really how Momento works under the scenes, where it's a 2-tier architecture, where all these clients are connecting basically to this outer routing layer. And then this routing layer talks to the internals of Momento. And one of the really nice things about gRPC in general is the fact that it can perform multiplexing, which, for lack of a better word, you can say connection sharing. So all of these different things that are trying to connect to these load balance servers behind Momento's routing layer are using these connections that are open. So you don't have to manage 100,000 connections, 1 million connections. You're just sharing the ones that are already connecting from the router to the internals, which makes things a lot faster and a lot easier to handle.
Well, and reduces the amount of management on Momento's side, right? So that's pretty cool. And goes back to what I was saying. It's like all these companies doing very interesting stuff that we can, again, I'm not that in the weeds of managing those types of connections, and the WebSockets we built were not in the 10,000, 100,000. So it just worked. But getting into those levels of connectivity and networking and all that, it's pretty incredible. And the cool thing about what people are doing nowadays is they're sharing what they're doing, right? So if I ever get into that situation where I need to provide an API with 100,000 connections, well, I'll reach out to Chris, right? But it's pretty incredible. The amount of, he said up to 100,000. No, you're talking millions, right? At that point.
Millions, yeah. So what Chris was talking about was really your limit when you're dealing with like WebSockets, when you're talking about managing individual connections.
Which individual open connection, long-lived connection, right? So with the multiplexing, you can get all of that and more with less infrastructure, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, gRPC is fast. It uses HTTP2. It uses protocol buffers as the mechanism to send the data over. It's just fundamentally different from using something like a request response API call, HTTP. So it's not perfect for every use case, but for things that require that long-lived connection and like minimal Rust level latencies, do use it. It's fantastic.
Nice.
So that was a really cool talk as well. I really like seeing stuff like that. That's something that I haven't really used extensively as an engineer, but should probably
provide those responsive APIs, right?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So let's go into live stream number 3 from last week, which was Danielle Heberline going in and working with DigitalOcean functions for the first time. Now, there was a lot. This was an 1.5-hour session. So I spliced together pieces from it to come up with a general theme. So let's listen in to what Danielle was experiencing.
So whatever a context is, it's different from a namespace. This is starting to be confusing at the number of abstractions here.
I think context is like if you want to have multiple API tokens.
That API token is already unique. Why do you need to add a context to it?
Okay. If we can figure this out. Doctor Serverless. So this is to manage the namespace being your function. Yeah, so like how do I get my code connects to support functions namespace of your choice? Optional argument should be a complete match to the namespace label. Very confusing though, because like I just want to pull down the code and run it locally.
I don't know why they sounded like robots at the beginning, but the point here in that conversation is that it was not immediately intuitive to do what they were trying to do. I think they were going a little bit beyond hello world and actually trying to build something meaningful.
Yep.
But it wasn't immediately obvious to Danielle on how to do that. Now, Danielle, being an AWS serverless hero, has a lot of experience with Lambda and serverless functions in general. DigitalOcean, not so much. I guess the Lambda skills didn't really transfer over to that provider.
And that's the thing, right? I think you and I work in the same cloud provider, right? AWS. So we're very focused in Lambda, step functions, and all this. You start working with another one, all you do is compare, right? That's the first thing we do. Like when we were doing temporal and other types of things, you're comparing, okay, what's the apples to apples here? And it might not always be apples to apples, right? They provide different developer experiences. They do things differently. They work differently. So it's maybe it takes a little bit more of a ramp up than what you're used to for a serverless function.
Yeah. And one of the things that I like to bring up in situations like this, and I've been quoted on this several times, is don't confuse unfamiliarity with complexity. Just because it wasn't immediately obvious straight out of the box doesn't mean it's complex. She was using the CLI. CLIs take time to learn. The AWS CLI, I would not say, is particularly intuitive. But she has a lot of experience with this. She can fly through it. DigitalOcean one, structured more or less the same, but you just have to figure out what the commands are.
And it's even at the point, you know what to Google, right? I don't use this AWS CLI day in, day out, right? I'm using the SDK. So when I try to do something with the CLI, I'm going to go to the documentation, but I know exactly where to go now. Whereas with DigitalOcean, very well documented, but you don't know exactly where you need to go to get what you want, right? If I'm doing SAM and I want to get the ARN of a Lambda function using a substitution variable, I know I'm going to look where I'm going to look and scroll to the bottom because that's where the variable name is going to be. Right? So it's those kind of things where you're faster to get to the documentation you need too.
Yes, 100%. Now, from that live stream, I am not turned off from DigitalOcean at all. I think it's apples to a different type of apple. You know how I love apples. Maybe we'll say it's like Honey Crisp to Cosmic Crisp. We'll say that. I'm not going to try it right now. There's too many other things that I want to learn. I think Cloudflare is next on my list, honestly, of things that I want to try out. But
there's so many things and all good ones, right? So
totally. Okay, so great talks last week. Great variety as well. Let's talk about this week. So we went about last week. Today, you know what, Anders, why don't you take this for us? This is a busy week. It's a really busy week this week for serverless.
We want to close out July strong and a little bit beginning of August. So today we're going to have the India Serverless Hero Lightning Round, right? We're going to have 4 serverless heroes giving lightning rounds. So that should be interesting.
It is. And they're all about like looking forward in development. It's like Lambda streaming, using GenAI, all those things that are like, again, bleeding edge, kind of like what we talked about earlier. It's building software for tomorrow.
And then also today we'll have production ready WebSockets with Yantray. And then also today, building a game server on ECS Fargate with Tico Franklin.
All very interesting talks. Again, a very wide variety of things that we're going to talk about as well.
And it's 1 in the morning, 1 midday, 1 afternoon, right? So they're spread across the day a little bit, I think. So definitely make time for those. If you can't, I know like work stuff gets in the way, but all the recordings will be there on YouTube. But we have more. So tomorrow we'll have Lorenzo Hidalgo talking about DynamoDB and common mistakes and optimizations you can do for DynamoDB. Then Thursday, you'll have us again. Alan and I will be taking App Studio for a spin.
I'm excited on that. What I want to do is I want to see how easy this new service is, App Studio. I want to see how easy it is to use. But the big thing that I want to get out of that live stream, is it enterprise grade? And we'll figure out what that means.
That's the slogan, right? It's enterprise grade applications with App Studio. So yeah, we'll put it to the test. Should be fun. It's in preview, right? It just got released in preview recently, so that one should be good. And then also on Thursday, we take a look into Neon Serverless Postgres with Mahmoud. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's a Neon's developer advocate, right? So
he is a developer advocate, yes. And that
Alan
session
and I,
is. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
you and I have played with Neon for a bit. I know you use it now for your personal project, so pretty cool. Pretty excited about that one.
It is, and Mahmoud is actually kicking off the August theme, which is third-party serverless. And third-party sounds, I don't know, third-party. I might change the name of the theme to something else, but really, it's serverless that's not AWS, Azure, GCP. So there's a lot of other services, a lot of other abstractions that are being built on top of these three that are providing meaningful services that really, really expedite development and maintainability of applications. So we're going to be highlighting a few of those in August, starting with Neon from Mahmoud.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Yes. So that's six sessions this week for Believe in Serverless. That's incredible. What a generous community we have. Everybody donating their time.
Yeah, it's when we started, we were planning, okay, what are we gonna do? Right back in January, we were talking about we're gonna do one talk a week. I was like, gonna be tough to maintain. But let's do it. Let's play it out. If it doesn't work out, we'll iterate. Right. That's a lot of what we do. We try things out and iterate as needed. No problems, right? As you can see, we have 6 this week. So I'm pretty excited for this week and what's to come for the rest of the year for the Believe in Serverless community.
Absolutely. And we need to, I'm going to start alluding to it now because I'm really excited about what Believe in Serverless community is going to be doing at AWS reInvent in December. So we're going to be all the champions are going to be planning basically the whole week's worth of things that we're going to be doing. And of course, we're going to be having that big party that started it all last year. We're going to be having that again. So in addition to the party, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of different stuff throughout the entire week at different vendor booths in the expo and probably around the casinos as well. So really excited about
awesome.
We're going to get going. Yeah. So last thing, as we wrap up, this again is to help you with anything that you might have missed inside of the community. I do still recommend checking out the community if you are not a part of that Discord server. Believeinserverless.com/community will take you straight there, and you can jump straight into the conversations. You can lurk. You can do anything that you want. It's a fantastic venue for learning about what real-world practitioners are doing, not only in serverless, but in modern cloud development, which is really, really valuable. Getting those tales from the battlefield is I don't even know the word to describe it, Andres. This is the thing that as an architect I would look for all the time. I would look for blogs. I would look for things that were tangentially related to what I was researching. Again, as an architect, and sometimes be able to find it. But now being able to have a single source where I can talk to people from literally all over the world about a very specific topic, it's amazing.
It's pretty incredible, right? And just knowing you can ask a question there and you'll get varying opinions, but all supportive on how you can solve something. You're seeing this issue, something's down. Hey, I'm seeing it too, right? It's just simple conversations or very complex conversations, but you're doing it with real world practitioners, experts, the builders of systems you're using, right? So we got AWS people, we got people from Neon, we got people from Momento, we got people from, all over the industry, which can help you with anything tech related. No.
Well said. Well said. Well said. So, okay. Well, that's it. That's everything that we have. What a week last week. It's going to be a great week going forward. And we will talk to you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in and happy coding.